Okay, shalom, shalom, everybody. Welcome again to this evening's class. All right, it's been a little while, but I'm back here again to present another presentation to the congregation. And to those of you that are listening here this evening, I want to say Shabbat Shalom, and I pray that everybody had a great week. But like we do in all of the classes that I do, I want to make sure that we give all esteem to the Father first. So let's begin with the book of Matthew, the 6th chapter, as the Mashiach was speaking with his disciples on how to pray to the Father. All right, very important. We always make sure that we give honor when honor is due. So we pray to the Father, and the Mashiach act as a mediator. Abinu, Shabbat Shamayim, Yit Kudas Shemka, O Yit Barak Malkutka, Retsunka Yahiye Ishui. Ba Shamayim, U Ba Aretz, Uts At Ain, Lat Menu Tamadit, Umakulanu, Kata'atenu, Ka'asher Anaknu, Mokhalim, U Al Tabi Anu Layide Nasayon, U Sham Ranu Makar. Taking time out of the busy schedule to join me this evening as I present another lesson. All right, we want to make sure that it is not I that is speaking. I want to make sure that everything is being done according to the Ruach HaKodesh. So I pray that the Father is able to pour his Ruach HaKodesh upon me, bring out this presentation to the congregation and to those of you that are listening, and that you might be able to get a great understanding on how we are to look at these end time events. Now, anybody that's been following me, you see that I've been dealing with the book of Daniel for quite some time, all right? Because there is a wealth, oh my gosh, there is so much information in the book of Daniel. I believe that it really needs to be examined thoroughly. I mean, extremely thoroughly, because it speaks again of a lot of things that's going to be happening here in these latter times, which I personally believe that we're living in. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get the ball rolling. And we are going to start our presentation here. So let's get the slides together. Okay, all right, shalom, shalom. Everything looks good. Okay, so shalom, family. My argument still stands. Anybody that's been keeping a close eye on my videos, like I said, I've been really looking into Daniel. All right, Daniel is a very interesting person that we should be looking at. He's one of our forefathers. We see that the messenger Gabriel gave him a lot of important information, and it is our responsibility to make sure that we understand the visions that he saw. So my argument still stands, Mr. Bakar. Daniel saw 4 kingdoms in contrast with 2 different visions. So understanding now these 4 kingdoms in contrast with the 2 different visions is going to be very important. And I really pray that those that have been watching, that you really take the time to go over the book of Daniel, the 2nd chapter, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, and the 12th chapter. I mean, all of the chapters are very important, but those chapters that I just mentioned are extremely important. And we have to understand that we have to look at these things through a Hebrew eyes, all right? Through a Hebrew eyes. So let's look at Daniel, the 8th chapter, verse 26, and we're going to be reading from the NASB version. This is Daniel once again, the 26th chapter, the 26th verse. And it reads, and the vision. Notice that I have the word vision highlighted in blue. All right, we want to leave no stones unturned here tonight. So, and the vision of the evenings and the mornings. And the title of tonight's class is 2300 Evenings and Mornings. So, and the vision of the evenings and the mornings, which has been told, is true. But keep the vision. That vision I have highlighted in red. But keep the vision secret, for it pertains to many days in the future. So, how are we to look at this with Hebrew eyes? First and foremost, what we need to do now is to understand or overstand that the word vision mentioned the first time in verse 26, it is not giving the same definition in the other word vision that I have written or highlighted here in red. One vision is pertaining to 490 years. The other vision is pertaining to 2,300 evenings and mornings. And what we want to do is break that down very carefully here this evening. Now, I also want everybody to pay very close attention to now is that Daniel saw, once again, 4 kingdoms and 2 different visions. So both the 490 years was explained to Daniel, and the 2,300 evenings and mornings were explained to Daniel. But notice what happens in the latter end of verse 26. It says, now keep the latter vision secret. Keep it secret, because I'm going to share with us here tonight is that last vision is centered around 2,300 evenings and mornings and not 490 years. Now, at the bottom of the page, you see the word kazon. Okay, I have that highlighted in red. The word kazon is revelation, sight, and vision. So when you look at it now in Hebrew, it's going to give you the definition of revelation, sight, and vision. Now, when you go to the word more, it's going to be slightly different. All right. So you also going to have to be able to keep in mind what we need to do is to make sure that we keep everything in its proper context. So the word now more, okay, means appearance, sight, vision. One more time. The word more means appearance, sight, vision. So I pray that that's clearly understood, because things are going to get a whole lot deeper as we move on with tonight's lesson. So Mishpachah, how do we understand Daniel's Moreh vision of 490 years and his secret vision of 2,300 evenings and mornings? But what we're going to share here this evening is that the 2,300 days are actually 2,300 years. So this calculation has to be correct. If the math does not work, we're going to come up with the wrong answer at the end of our mathematical equation. Now, I have highlighted the word more because we're dealing with the Moreh vision first. The Moreh vision is broken down into 70 prophetic weeks. The Moreh vision is also broken down into 490 literal years. And I pray that everybody understands what's going on so far. All right, shalom, shalom, my sister Sharon. It's always good to see you here with me here tonight as we go over the 2,300 evenings and mornings. So this is the mathematical equation on how we break down the 490 years that is talked about in the book of Daniel, the 8th chapter. You have the number 7, 62, and you have the number 1. If you add 7 plus 62 plus 1, you get 70 prophetic weeks. 70 prophetic weeks. Then now everything is multiplied by 7. So if you multiply 7 times 7, you get 49 literal years. If you multiply 7 times 62, you get 434 literal years. If you multiply 7, it's not even an if. This is what we're going to do, all right? So when you multiply 7 times 1, you get 7. And so when you do now the literal years, 49 plus 434 plus 7 gives you 490 literal years. So I pray that everybody is following along so far. Then I have now right below the black line, I have the numbers 457 BC. I have the numbers 408 BC. Then I have BC, because we're now moving into the AD era. Then I have 27 AD. Then I have 34 AD. Then I have 70 AD. And above that, I have, to my far right, I have the Yahudim, or the Jews, reject the final appeal. I have now the stoning of Stephen. And then we have the gospel or the Basora of the good news goes out to the Gentiles. So how do we break this whole thing down here? Daniel was told that because of Israel's disobedience, preferably here we're talking about southern kingdom, that they will serve captivity under the Babylonians for 70 years. 70 years. So what we need to know now is, when was this 70 years up? So, and when we get the mathematical equation is when the Babylonian captivity started, which is 605 BC, but I don't want to jump the gun. I just want to stick with this diagram that we have here now so far. When we look at now the 457 BC, 457 BC is so important because it explains to us when Israel got her final decree to rebuild Jerusalem. Not just Jerusalem, we're talking about the walls. We're talking about setting up the Levitical priesthood again. We're talking about Israel establishing herself once again because the 70 years are up. So we know that there were 3 decrees, all right? But the decree that we're looking for, that we're paying close attention to, is the 457 BC. That decree was implemented by Xerxes, King Xerxes. Okay, because the other 2 decrees that was put into play, and we'll talk about that also a little bit later. The previous 2 decrees now that were placed, Israel had problems with the other nations in trying to rebuild the city walls and trying to reestablish themselves as a government again. And so once the decree was put together by Xerxes in 457 BC, that set the stage where there was no more interruption. And so it began in 457 BC. It took now 49 literal years to get all of this established. I've talked about this so many times before. We're talking about the reestablishing of the Levitical priesthood, the building of the walls, the cities. In order to get Israel reestablished as a nation, that took 49 years, okay, or 7 weeks. And then what you do now simply is that you subtract 49 from 457, and you have 408 BC. So 408 BC is a very important number because it's going to now usher in the next important date. Because all of this now is actually ushering in the coming of the Mashiach. Because once again, now we're talking about the Mare vision. And that Mare vision is referring to the Mashiach. Everything, all arrows point to the Mashiach. But there are certain things that has to happen first before we can usher in the Mashiach. So we have 408 BC, and we now have a span of 434 prophetic literal years that needs to be examined. So once we do that, when you subtract 408 from 434, you get 27 AD. All right, 27 AD. Why is 27 AD important? Because the Mashiach is immersed by YAHUAH the Immerser, which is commonly known as John the Baptist. That took place in 27 AD. And I did about 3 classes on that already. So what I'm doing now, I'm playing, this is just like a brief, like little recap to bring everybody up to speed, but you would have to be able to follow along with my classes in order to know exactly what's going on here tonight. All right, I don't have time to go and do the whole class all over again. I just want to give a quick recap. I also want to bring to everybody's attention tonight is that the vowel pointing system at this time, during the time of the Babylonian captivity, during the time of the Medo-Persian Empire, the Greeks, and even the Romans, be very careful with the vowel pointing system. All right. There was no such thing as the vowel pointing system, the Nakud system, during the time of the Babylonians, the Greeks, excuse me, the Babylonians, the Medo-Persian Empire, and the Greeks. All right. So we have the Masoretic text, meaning now the vowel pointing system, that happened anywhere between the 8th and the 10th century AD. All right, so I just wanted to make sure everybody's clear on what's going on here. So let's continue on what we have here now. So we have, with 70 prophetic weeks, we have 62 weeks that needs to be accomplished. And there was a lot of things that was happening during the 62 prophetic weeks. And what I find most important that was happening during this time here is we have the Maccabean era. All right. It is very important that we get a great understanding of what was going on with Judas Maccabees, Matthias, Onias, all of these guys here, the Hasmonean dynasty. All of these things are very important to help us now to be able to put the pieces of the puzzle together so that there's no interruption in this mathematical equation that we're putting together here tonight. And let me also say too now is that I do not get into dates as far as when this whole thing is going to come to a climax. I don't do that. What I do is that I tell each and every brother to make sure that they keep oil in their lamps. All right. Don't be like the 5 unwise virgins now who didn't keep the oil in their lamps. And so when the day of the great shofar was blown, and we have now the introduction to the bride, that the groom is now ready to receive his bride. Make sure that you stay diligent and that you stay in Torah with all things that you do. Okay, we have our sister here. We have 565 to 965 was the first slave to civil rights and Martin Luther King. Second was 1619 to 2019, the house of David in the spirit of the truth crying out, and now the nations are falling. Now we are definitely living in some real critical times here, and so that was some very good information that our sister has brought to the table here. And it's going to get very interesting as we begin to unfold these numbers here, because remember, 70 weeks was declared as a punishment for the nation of Israel because of the sins that she had committed. And so, listen, Israel was removed out of the land in 605 BC. And once again, we'll talk about that a little bit later. So now that we have the 62 years or the 62 weeks being accomplished, and the 62 weeks is associated with 434 because once again, 62 times 7 gives you 434. So now that we're moving from the BC era to the AD era, it is very important that we keep this timeline. This timeline is extremely important because the next event that we have is the last week. The last week. So once again, 7 plus 62 is 69. Once the 434 week is accomplished, or the 62 weeks is accomplished, we only have one more week. And that week is very important because that week there is centered around the Moreh vision, and that Moreh vision is Yahusha Ha'Mashiach. Now take notice of something very important. The Mashiach's ministry, okay, his ministry now was actually 1 week, one prophetic week. But something happened in the midst of that prophetic week. In the midst of that prophetic week, the Mashiach was cut off. Now, when we look at the 490 literal years, the last 7 years is extremely important in regards to the Mashiach's ministry, his purpose, and the whole number 490 years. Meaning now is that the Mashiach was cut off in the midst of the literal week, but how do we now equate that now to the literal years? Because 7 times 1 is 7. So half of 7 would be 3.5. The Mashiach was cut off in in 3.5 years of his ministry. He was cut off, which leaves us now 3.5 years left to go, which means now was that when you add 3.5 and 3.5, or 3.5 and 3.5, you get a total of 7 years. Once that is completed now, you now have 34 AD. So this is how you do the math. In prophetic weeks, 7 times 62 plus 1 gives you 70 prophetic weeks, which gives you now, as far as time is concerned, you have now 34 AD. In 490 literal years, you have 490 literal years, 434 literal years, and then you have that last 7, which brings you now from 34 AD. So only thing that a person would have to do, when you do the math, 457 BC, okay, and we have to accomplish now 490 years, literal years now, that brings you to 34 AD. What is so important about 34 AD? Well, 34 AD, you have now, in every sense of the word, maybe, is that you have the Yahudims' final appeal. The Yahudims, they reject the final appeal, and we have now the stoning of Stephen. The stoning of Stephen happened in 34 AD. What I also found interesting is that we also have Shaul, Paul beginning his conversion in 34 AD when he's on the road to Damascus and he's persecuting the Yahudims. He gets his vision from Shamayim, from the sovereign Yahushua Ha'Mashiach. Why are you kicking against the pricks? All right. So the things that you're doing now by persecuting the Yahudims, the Jews, you're actually doing this to me. All right. So I find that very interesting is that whoever afflicts the bride is actually afflicting the bridegroom. So the bridegroom and the bride run hand in hand. Now what's interesting now is that when we begin to look at, we're now diving into the 2,300 years or 2,300 evenings and mornings. Some people are saying that it runs consecutive, beginning at 457 BC, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But I want everybody to understand that the 70 prophetic weeks ended in 34 AD. 490 literal years ended in 34 AD. To take this a step further, all right, a step further, 70 AD is happening under the Chazon. It's happening under the Chazon. I'm just going to go back one slide. Daniel 8:26. And the vision of the evenings and the mornings, which has been told, is true. Because we're talking about time. All of this is time. The vision is pertaining to time, and the vision of the Chazon is talking about time. So the things that was told is true. But Gabriel told Daniel, however, keep the vision of the Chazon secret, for it pertains to many days in the future. Meaning now is that if we look at this in chronological order, the vision of the Moreh has to happen first. After the vision of the Moreh, which is centered around 490 years, once that is completed, then we go into now the vision, which is the Chazon, and that is pertaining to 2,300 evenings and mornings. I pray that that was understandable. Now, what do we have here? Mr. Bakar, I believe it's extremely imperative to have this conversation with dates in order to establish some kind of foundation. I know that there's a lot of people that don't want to deal with the dates. That's kind of odd to me, and everybody has their own way of doing their classes on how they think. I get it, all right? But in order to have a decent conversation, I personally believe that the more information that you bring to the table, the stronger your argument can be. So these are some of the dates that some of the scholars are talking about. I have no reason to doubt it. But if some are doubting dates, I guess that's just a whole nother topic. I mean, I really can't. So in Daniel, the second chapter, it is explained to Daniel, when you're looking at these four kingdoms, one kingdom represents the head of gold. And that head of gold is Babylon. The next one, or the next kingdom to come in play, is the silver. The silver represents the shoulders and arms and chest of steel. In the Medo-Persian Empire, ran from 539 BC to 331 BC. This is all what Daniel, the second chapter, is talking about, because Gabriel stays very close to the understanding on what's going on here. And I like what Gabriel is doing, is that he's giving Daniel this vision in increments, meaning now is that he understands that Daniel is a babe. And he's not going to throw the whole thing on him all at once. He's going to feed the visions to him, or these four kingdoms here now. He's going to explain all of this to him in baby steps. So let's continue on. So we have the waist, the hips, and the thighs, which is going to represent the Bronze Era, or the Greeks. And the Greeks ran from 331 BC to 168 BC. And then we have another kingdom coming up. There's four kingdoms. Then we have the iron. The iron now ran from 168 BC to 476 AD. All right, 476 AD. But notice now is that at the latter end of Rome, because Rome was not destroyed, she only transitioned, and she had to make this transitioning because the iron is still operating in 476 AD, but they're operating now under of Daniel. And so we see now this transitioning of Rome to Europe. Europe today, so we have that date of 476 AD to present time. All right, and we're going to also be able to see now, when you go to the book of Revelation, the 13th chapter, where there was another beast that comes into play, and this is where we get into America. So I just don't want to go too fast. I just want to make sure the same way that Gabriel was breaking it down to Daniel, I want to make sure that I do it the same way. Now, Daniel, the 7th chapter now, Gabriel, he even elaborates more on these four kingdoms. Daniel, the 7th chapter now, calls the head of gold the lion. And he calls the silver, the Medo-Persian Empire, the bear. The bronze, he calls now, which is the Greeks, he calls them the leopard. And now the iron, which is Rome, he calls them the beast. And we know that that beast is actually the eagle that is talked about in the book of 2nd Ezra. And we know that the iron and the clay, which is Europe, which is also now with the 10 horns. And we're going to get into that a little bit later. But what I also found interesting too, Mr. Picard, is that when you look at the book of Daniel, the 7th chapter, the lion is described as an eagle with wings. It goes into now how the wings were plucked up. He stands like a man. We also have Greece, all right? Greece now in Daniel, the 7th chapter is looked at or is explained or expounded upon a little bit more. It's now the leopard. And the leopard is represented by 4 wings and 4 heads, all right? And the 4 wings only represents that, this is actually Alexander the Greek, by the way. Alexander the Greek now, in the 4 wings represents the swiftness that Alexander the Greek was able to now conquer the territory that he conquered. The 4 heads represents Cassandra, Lysichimus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. These are the four heads that came up after the horn was broken. Okay, this goat here. Then we have the iron, which is explained in Daniel the second chapter, which is Rome. In Daniel the seventh chapter, the iron is represented now as the beast. And its description is it's dreadful, extremely strong, large iron teeth, and it was different from all of the other beasts that preceded it, which are the Greeks, the Medo-Persians, and the Babylonians. There is something different from about this particular beast. And what I wanted to also share too now was that this is when Israel began to lose her identity. All right. This is where you now begin to see Israel being called bywords. Actually, it started with the Greeks, but you could really begin to see it take place amongst the Romans. And again, not excluding that it didn't happen amongst the Greeks, all right? Because when you read the first book of the Maccabees, you see that where Israel had even wanted a license now to even perform and do the things that the Greeks were doing. And you begin to see the IUS and the like Maccabeus, Julius, all of those us endings at the end of names was indicating that our people now were beginning to now fall away from the Hebrew names and begin to take on Greek culture. And then you have the iron and clay, like I said earlier, which is Europe. And then the iron and clay, we have now the 10 horns. And then it makes mention of a little horn. And then it makes mention that it had eyes and a boastful mouth. And that this little horn removed 3 of the 10 horns. In Daniel, the 8th chapter, I know this is a lot of history, Mishpachah, but this is the reason why sometimes it takes a little while for me to put these classes together, because I want to make sure that everything is done correctly. And if anybody have any questions, it's always easier if you were to point to the slides. But if you can't point to the slides, I still will be able to give you my reasoning behind what I'm saying in regards to my explanation of Daniel, the 2nd, 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, and I have not done the 11th chapter yet. All right, so let's continue to move on. So Daniel, the 8th chapter, this is the 3rd year of Belshazzar. This is where we're at here this evening. So we see that now the Medo-Persian Empire, they go from being called the silver to the bear to now the ram. And then we have the bronze, which now goes from the Greeks to the leopard to the goat. And then the iron goes from Rome to the beast, and that beast is the eagle, it goes into the small horn. And then we have the iron mixed with clay, which is these 10 barbaric tribes that actually invaded the iron, which is Rome. And we have Europe, and we have the small horn. And so all of this now takes place in Daniel, the 8th chapter. But I want everybody to please pay, again, very close attention to what's going on here, because there's a lot of information. And I believe, this is just me personally, and I don't say this out of arrogance. I'm not saying this to be mean. I see oftentimes when brothers go into Daniel 2, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11 is going to be, that's going to be a headbanger, because there is so much history in Daniel, the 11th chapter. I'm going to let you know straight off the bat. That's going to take a very long time to do. But again, making sure as good students of Torah, notice that in Daniel, the 8th chapter, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more in detail a little bit later. In Daniel, the 8th chapter, it makes mention that the ram, okay, which is the Medo-Persian Empire, that it magnified itself. When you get now down to the Bronze Era, which are the Greeks, it makes mention now that Alexander the Greek, the goat, that it magnified itself exceedingly. So notice how we have it magnified itself, which were the Medo-Persian Empire. And then when we get down to the Greek or the Greco Empire, that empire magnified itself exceedingly. And then now when you get down to Rome, or the iron mixed with clay, it's said now is that this power or these kingdoms now, as they get weaker in value, their demeanor or the things that they're now implementing throughout the world becomes more wicked. Because Israel knew her identity amongst the Babylonian Empire. She knew who she was during the Medo-Persian Empire. And when we get to the Greek era, that's when things began to change. And the conditions for Israel got worse as time went on. So by the time you get to present day, it's said now is that during the iron and clay era, that government magnified itself equal to commander of the hosts. And what we need to know now is that who is the commander of the hosts? All right. And this is where we begin to look at events that goes past 70 AD. Let's move on. Now, watch how verse 27 easily explains verse 26. So let's just simply go back to verse 26. It says, "And the vision of the evenings and the mornings, which has been told, is true. But keep the vision secret, for it pertains to many days in the future." Now, let's see now how this is actually answered. Daniel, the 8th chapter, verse 27. Okay, here we go. "Then I, Daniel, was exhausted, okay, and sick for days, or for many days. Then I, Daniel, got up again and carried on the king's business." Watch this now. Very important. "But I was astounded at the vision, and there was none to explain it." Now, again, the word vision is more, and the word more is appearance, sight, and vision. Well, just in case you might be lost a little bit here, I said earlier that the word vision, as it appears in Daniel, the 8th chapter, verse 26, the first time that we see it here in this particular verse, that word vision is more. More. So, and what I'm trying to share with everybody is that the more, the definite article more, is Yahushua HaMashiach. And then we have the Kazon, which is 2,300 evenings and mornings. That pertains to the end, or many days in the future. And this is the reason why I have said times before, eschatology, the study of end time events. The study of end time events is centered around the Kazon, because the Kazon pertains to many days in the future. All right? So, one more time. "Then I, Daniel, was exhausted and sick for days. Then I, Daniel, got up again and carried on the king's business. But I, Daniel, was astounded at the vision, and there was none to explain it." So we have something interesting that's going on here. So Daniel wants an explanation of the vision of the more. That's what he wants a vision of. So let's see how Daniel is going to get his explanation. Is Daniel going to get it? Is he going to get his explanation from Gabriel in the order that he wants it? Because Daniel wants the explanation of the more vision. Let's move on. So please follow along very closely, because each verse is going to have you travel deeper into the sea. So if you can't swim, no problem. Get yourself one of those balloon, that you put underneath your arms, or you put underneath over your waist, that keeps you above the waters. All right. But once again, it is very important that you understand or understand that we're about to go a whole lot deeper with Daniel, the 8th chapter. And once again, I'm reading from the NSAB version. Now, in the 3rd year of the reign of Belshazzar, the king, a vision. When you look at that word vision, it's the word kazon. Kazon, not more, but kazon. Daniel, subsequent to the one which appeared to me previously, I looked in the vision, which is kazon. And while I was looking, I was in the citadel of Susa, which is in the province of Elam, and I looked in the vision, and I myself was beside the Ulai or Ulay canal. Now, a lot of people will say, hey, Kasad, you know what? I don't want to look at this Hebraically. I just want to look at it from the Oxford Webster's Dictionary and give a definition of the word vision based upon what I found in the dictionary. My argument is that Daniel did not know Webster, Daniel did not know Oxford, and none of these other modern dictionaries that we have today. You must look at scripture from a Hebraic perspective. If you're not going to do that, you're going to run into major problems. So let's move on. But as you see, in Daniel, the 8th chapter, verses 1 to 2, something should click. We need to know why this vision is the Kazon vision and not the Mare vision. This vision now pertains to many days in the future. So when you go to 8:26, Daniel, the 8th chapter, verse 26, Daniel was already in the Babylonian captivity. He was already there. There were 457 had not come to fruition yet. The 70 years isn't up yet. So that means now is that everything from the point of Daniel being in captivity under the Babylonians, anything that is being told now at this point is considered in the future, because the Medo-Persian Empire had not happened yet. The Greeks had not come into play yet, and the Romans had not come into play yet. Europe, the United Nations, NATO, which is modern terms now here, none of that has come to fruition yet. So, simply said, the Medo-Persian Empire, that vision would be considered a kazon because it did not happen yet. This is something that's going to happen in the future, and this future now is going to expand further than the Medo-Persian Empire and the Greeks and the Romans. It surpasses that time. Let's read on. Gabriel begins to explain the 4 kingdoms to Daniel. First, the 4 kingdoms. Daniel, the 8th chapter, verses 3 to 4. And again, this is an NSAB version. Then I, Daniel, lifted my eyes, then looked, and behold, a ram. Daniel is in the Babylonian captivity. Nebuchadnezzar represents the lion with wings. So what Daniel is seeing right now is a future prophecy, meaning now that after the head of gold, another empire is going to rule. So then I lifted my eyes and looked, and behold, a ram which had 2 horns was standing in the front of the canal. Now the 2 horns were long, And when it makes mention that the two horns were long, it only means that the extent of or the length of time these empires would rule. And it would be now for quite some time. Now, the two horns were long, but one horn was longer than the other, with the longer one coming up last. So this is the reason why we say Medo-Persian. The Medes came up first, and then we have the Persian Empire. And we know that Xerxes now was a Persian. But one was longer than the other, while the longer one came up last. Now, I saw the ram, which is the Medo-Persian Empire. I saw the ram budding. Watch this now. This is so important. I saw the ram budding westward, northward, and southward. If you look at a compass, this is talking about direction. Westward, northward, and southward. So this ram now was budding, and is budding now here, and his goal is to conquer. Mishpachah, hold on one quick second. All right, this is going to take 1 second. Hold on. Okay, I'm back with you, Mr. McCombs. I apologize for the delay. It was something that I needed to do right quick, but everything is totally owed. So let's again look at what is going on with Daniel, the 8th chapter, verses 3 to 4, because once again, these directions on where the ram is budding, like I said, it is extremely important. I just want everybody to get a good understanding on what is actually going on here. So, okay, let's just continue. Let's see here to read on here. Okay, 1 second here. Okay, we're all good. We're all good. So, directions are going to be very important, Mr. McCobb. You see that the ram is budding westward, northward, and southward, and no other beast could stand before him, nor was there anyone to rescue from his power, but he did as he pleased and magnified himself. All right. So once again, I had brought out earlier this whole thing with magnifying himself, exceedingly magnifying himself. All these things are going to be very important. And so I also have things highlighted in bold black letters to help everybody to follow along with everything that I'm saying here this evening. Let's move on. The mystery of Daniel, verse 3, is explained in verse 20. The ram's identity. The ram which thou sawest having two horns are the kings of Media and Persia. All right. So if anybody is questioning whether or not the ram with two horns, there might be somebody else. Well, here's the answer to your question right here. In Daniel, the 3rd chapter, the ram's identity is actually the Medes and the Persians. Geography is also very important to help us understand, Mr. McCarr, how to look at the conquering areas that the Medo-Persians actually did. And we see that the Medo-Persian Empire, they conquered Babylon, they conquered Egypt, they conquered Lydia. All right, these are the three major areas that the Medo-Persians conquered. And I have a map here, all right, and it's also given the audience here tonight a visual on what these areas look like, all right? And I pray that once again, I'm bringing this thing out with clarity. And again, the title of tonight's class is the 2,300 Evenings and Mornings, which is actually 2,300 years. Let's move on. Gabriel explains the third of four kingdoms to Daniel, all right? So once again, Daniel was already in the Babylonian captivity, and we just got an explanation of the Medo-Persian Empire. So Daniel, the 8th chapter, verses 5 through 8, is going to explain now the third of four kingdoms. While I was observing, behold, a male goat. All right, so we had a ram. So now we have a male goat was coming up from the west over the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground. And this is what these wings represent. It represents how swiftly Alexander the Greek was able to conquer and do the mischief that he did. Is that those wings represents the swiftness that he was able to now do countries here. And the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes. He came up to the ram, which are the Medo-Persian empires that had the two horns, which I had seen standing in front of the canal, and rushed at the ram in his might, in his wrath. I saw him come beside the ram, and he was enraged at him. And he struck the ram and shattered his two horns. And the ram had no strength to withstand him. So he hurled him to the ground and trampled on him. And there was none to rescue the Medo-Persians from his power, which is the Greeks. Watch this now. Then the male goat magnified himself exceedingly. So we have magnified himself. And what they're actually doing now is that the ram magnified himself against the Most High. Now, what do you mean by that? Nebuchadnezzar rebelled against the Most High plenty of times, all right? He had the opportunity to see how the Father was working with Daniel and the breakdown of his dreams. We also had the situation where there was the deliverance out of the lion's den. We see the furnace of fire. The Father was always working with Israel, even in captivity. And if we were to now look at that, as long as you're obedient to Torah, not putting the government over your personal affairs. I have to say this again. At some point, we have to know how to operate in the system without being part of the system. We were warned to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. All right? So I'll leave that there because there's a whole lot in what I just said there. All right? So let's just get back here. And so the male goat magnified himself exceedingly, but as soon as he was mighty, the large horn, which is Alexander the Greek, was broken. And in this place there came up four conspicuous. Now that word horns here, right? You might have the word horns in your King James Version, but that word horns is not there. If it's in italics, it is not there. And that's what I like about the King James Version. If it's not there, he'll write it in italics. But anyway, there came up four conspicuous towards the four winds of the heaven. Notice now in verse 8 that I have in bold type the word magnified himself exceedingly. And I also have the word for conspicuous towards the four winds of heaven. Towards the four winds of heaven is going to be very important. That's the reason why I have it um, in bold black letters. Let's read on. Gabriel patiently explains to Daniel the name of the third kingdom, the goat. And the rough goat is the king of Grecia. And the great horn that is between his eyes is Grecia's first king, which is Alexander the Greek. Now that being broken, which is this large horn, whereas four stood up for it, four kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. Now you have the CSB version that reads a little bit interesting. It says now, the shaggy goat represents the king of Greece, and the large horn between his eyes represents the first king. The first horn that took the place of the broken horn represents four kingdoms. They shall rise from that nation, but without its power. Now, what I found interesting, just interesting, that the third kingdom is represented as a shaggy goat. And I find it interesting that when you go to the book of Genesis, the 25th chapter, it makes mention that Esau was hairy all over like a hairy garment. All right, I'll leave that there because it gets kind of complicated a little bit, and I have to talk about that in another lesson. As far as Japheth and where this whole thing with Greeks, all right, we'll talk about that at another time. All right, that's another lesson. But I just found these little clues here. When we begin to examine these writings, I found some of them very, very interesting. Sharon says, well said, this place is a united of offices of nations, right? And in the United States, this United States is a corporation, all right? These United States is a corporation, and so it's about business. This is a business country. And so into our religious endeavors or our religious relationships that we have with one another, and how we're supposed to be honoring and representing our mighty one or savior, the government is not supposed to have a say in any of this at all. It's just that we've involved the United States in our lives, when initially that was not their initial purpose of coming together. And it also talks about that, how we see now Rome becomes a republic, where we begin to see what is happening between Eastern and Western Rome. When we begin to see now in 538 AD, we begin to see the Roman Catholic Church come into play. And I don't want to go too far into that right now, but we'll tackle that at a later date. Now, the water level of Mishpachah is slightly above our chin. All right. I said that we're about to go a little bit deeper into this water here. So make sure that you're prepared. I'm going to be going over a whole lot of information here, and I don't want anybody to get lost. Those of you that are listening in this evening, if you can create a little algorithm here, if you can just hit the like button, share the video, because I'm all about sharing the information. And if anybody has any questions regarding anything that I'm saying, I'm free. Ask the question. If you want a copy of the slideshow, that is real easy to do. It is free. I'll send you a copy of the slideshow also. Now, once again, the water level is slightly above our chin. Who is the small kingdom that grew, in all caps here now, that grew exceedingly great? Daniel the 8th chapter, verses 8 through 9. We're almost done. It says now, I have it in bold letters here, out of one of them came forth a rather small horn. Listen to this now. Out of one of them came forth a rather small horn, and this small horn started off small, and it grew exceedingly great. Watch this now, towards the south. It grew exceedingly great because it was once small, but it grew exceedingly great towards the south. It grew exceedingly great towards the east, and it grew exceedingly great towards the beautiful land. Now, the first thing that we need to tackle, let's go back to verses 5 through 8. But I just want to read verse 8. It says that the male goat magnified himself exceedingly, but as soon as it was mighty, the large horn was broken. And in this place there came up 4 conspicuous kingdoms, or horns, is in italics, towards the 4 winds of the heaven. So this is my question to those of you that are listening here tonight. Out of one of them, out of Cassandra, Lysistrata, Seleucus, Ptolemy, or is out of one of them pertaining to one of the 4 directions of the winds? Let's go back again. I want to show everybody know what's going on, because I have it in bold letters here. Towards the 4 winds of the heaven. So where did this next horn come from? Let's go back. Let's break it down. Let me go back. Excuse me. So out of one of them came forth a small horn which grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, and towards the beautiful land. Okay, let's see what our sister Sharon says. And the righteous scepter shall depart from Judah. Okay, we know that. I think you're talking about Genesis, the 49th chapter. Yet the scepter should not depart from Judah, and to Shiloh comes, and to him shall be the gathering of the people. You have a question with the Greeks. Okay, I'm going to have you expound upon that question, all right? Interesting. All right, so out of one of them came forth a rather small horn, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, and towards the beautiful land. So this is what this little horn has to do. It started off small, once again, but it must grow in stature, and it must now have accomplished in its goal in conquering the south, towards the east, and towards the beautiful land. Let's look at the 2 scripts together in order to come up with the right answer. Remember, small details count. Remember, small details count. Daniel the 8th chapter, verses 8 through 9. Then the male goat, which is Alexander the Greek, the male goat magnified himself exceedingly. But as soon as he was mighty, the large horn, move that out of the way, the large horn was broken. And in this place there came up 4 conspicuous horns, in italics, towards the 4 winds of the heaven. Out of one of them came forth a rather small horn, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, and towards the beautiful land. Let's get the answer to the question. Now, Mr. Carr, here we go. Now remember I said details are very important. Let's see if you watched for the clues that gives us the answer. Daniel saw another powerful animal attack the ram, breaking its horns. And we know that the ram is the Medo-Persian Empire. The male goat is the kingdom of Greece. The large horn that is between his eyes is the first king. As for the broken horn and the fourth that stood up in his place, 4 kingdoms shall rise out of that nation. That is in Daniel, the 8th chapter, verse 21 to 22. Watch this now. History affirms that Greece conquered the Medo-Persian Empire. So it is clear that the large horn on this goat represents Alexander the Greek, the first king. And just as the vision foretold, after his death, the empire was divided amongst his 4 generals, okay, because it is argued that Alexander the Greek did have a successor, meaning that he did have seed. He did have a son, but his son was not old enough to actually take the position after Alexander the Greek. So his kingdom was actually divided amongst his 4 generals. So let's go on. But then Daniel sees a vision, another power that would arise after Greece, a little horn which grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, and towards the glorious land. This is in verse 9. What world power, this is a question, what world power arose after Greece? This is the question. If we kept the line of succession, because the line of succession that we have is Babylon, Medo-Persian Empire, the Greeks. So what world power arose after Greece? Because there is a function that this next empire has to do in order to be considered a world power. Let's read on. Please pay attention to the function of the little horn. Rome versus Antiochus Epiphanes IV. Because some are arguing that this small horn that came up and grew exceedingly and conquered lands is actually Antiochus Epiphanes IV. I've drawn my line in the sand. I'm not budging, all right? It was not Antiochus Epiphanes IV. It was actually Rome. And let's read on and let's see why I'm saying what I'm saying. In 168 BC, Antiochus led a second attack on Egypt and also sent a fleet to capture Cyprus. Before he, which is Antiochus Epiphanes, he reached Alexander, his path was blocked by a single elderly Roman ambassador named Gaius Populus Laenus. Again, his name is Gaius Populus Laenus. All right, I know that last part sounds funny, but I guess that's how you're pronouncing his name. Now, 168 is going to be very important because at 168, you have the Battle of Pydna. The Battle of Pydna is extremely also on the run, and he's trying to make a name for himself. Watch this now. Gaius Populus Laenus, who delivered a message from the Roman Senate, directing Antiochus or Antiochus to withdraw his army from Egypt and Cyprus, or consider himself in a state of war with the big dogs, which is the Roman Empire. Now, right here, I believe that this should cause a red flag, a major red flag. But for some, this does not create a red flag. Because my argument is, if Antiochus Epiphanes was this small horn and he grew exceedingly great, why wasn't Antiochus Epiphanes IV willing to go to war with Rome? That's the reason why I said dates are very important. 168 BC is extremely important because we have to understand what happened at the Battle of Pydnia in 168 BC. And looking at the model that I showed with the four kingdoms, which was Babylon, or the head of gold, the silver, the brass, the iron, and then the iron mixed with clay. The dates when these empires came into play, you can't refute it. But let's read on. It says now, let me read it. And so Gaius Populus Laenus, who delivered a message from the Roman Senate directing Antiochus Epiphanes to withdraw his armies from Egypt and Cyprus, or consider himself in a state of war with the Roman Republic. Antiochus said he would discuss it with his council, whereupon the Roman envoy drew a line in the sand around Antiochus and said, "Listen here, Antiochus Epiphanes, before you leave this circle, give me a reply that I can take back to the Roman Senate." This implied Rome would declare war if the king stepped out of his circle without committing to leave Egypt immediately. Antiochus Epiphanes, weighing his options, Antiochus decided to withdraw. Only then did Populus agree to shake hands with him. Ancient sources and traditional historical or historiography describes this day as the day of Eliseus, as a great humiliation for Antiochus IV that unhinged him for a time. So more modern historians conjecture that Antiochus may have been more reconciled to this than ancient sources indicate, as the Roman invention meant that Rome had been given an excuse to undertake a potential long and costly siege at Alexandria. He could instead return with treasures and loot, having weakened the Egyptian state a little risk and cost compared to a large-scale invasion. So I just found this really important because now, at this point, from 168 BC to 476 AD, with Rome reaching the height of her power in 117 BC, Rome is the one that is actually starting off small and becoming a great nation, not Antiochus Epiphanes. Antiochus Epiphanes inherited his fortune from the Seleucids. And when he tried to expound or to become or to make a name for himself the way that his forefathers were able to do, like Antiochus Epiphanes III, he failed. He could not go to war with the Romans. All right? He did not have that type of strength. Let's read on. Let's take a second peek into Antiochus or Antiochus Epiphanes through the eyes of Judas Maccabeus, who was a revolutionist. Now, remember I had shared with you how Israel had become conformed to the ways of the Greeks. Maccabeus, the word EUS, those words, that name is not Hebrew. And the reason why I say it's not Hebrew is because of what is that us, just like Jesus, EUS, Aristobulus. Those names are identifying with a culture that is not Israel's culture. So Judas Maccabeus, his date of birth is 190 BC. His date of death is 160 BC, and he was killed in battle. His place of birth was Judea. He was best known as the Jewish warrior who instituted Hanukkah. So let's read on here a little bit. Judas Maccabeus led the Yahudims, or the Jewish people, in recapturing their temple from Syrian occupation or Syrian occupying forces in 164 BC. According to ancient Greek books known as 1st and 2nd Maccabees, the uprising was started in 167 BC by Judas' father, the priest Matthias, against Antiochus Epiphanes IV, the Syrian ruler of what is now Israel Palestine. Judas continued the revolt after Matthias' death, eventually retaking the desecrated Jerusalem temple. After restoring and dedicating it, Judas and all the assembly of Israel decided the event should be remembered annually with joy and with gladness for 8 days. Now, observing each December as Hanukkah, Hebrew word for means to dedicate, in the ensuing years, Judas fended off many attacks, liberated captive Yahudim in Galilee, evaded a kidnapping attempt, this is where things starts to go south for the Maccabees. The Maccabees made an alliance with Rome, and Judas Maccabees, he died fighting Syrian forces. Judas Maccabee should not be confused with Judas Iscariot, a disciple of the Mashiach. All right. So I just found it interesting is that Judas Maccabeus was able to go to war with Antiochus Epiphanes' army and actually now recapture some of the territory and actually now rebuild or the desecrated temple of Jerusalem, because it was Antiochus Epiphanes who desecrated the temple by killing swine on the altar. And so he did a whole lot of horrendous acts, but he wasn't as strong as people are making him out to be. All right, did he do a lot of damage to the Yahudims? Absolutely. And because once he had to leave Egypt, Antiochus Epiphanes put his tail between his behind, and he went back to Jerusalem and he looted the temples of Jerusalem. So he did a lot of looting and picking on the people of Israel. And a lot of that had to do is because Israel didn't have the will to fight, and especially on the Shabbats. And this is when it was brought to Israel's attention: if you don't take arms on the Shabbat and defend yourself on the Shabbat, Israel will cease to be a nation. And that's another story too, because some folks are like, wow, you can't do this on the Shabbat, you can't do that on the Shabbat. Listen, you're in captivity, and you better realize where you're at. Because when we were in our land, we were disobedient, and so the Father kicked us out of the land. So now that you're in your captivity, know what? You are now spoils of war, and you are now subject to the laws of your captives. Now, there are a lot of things that we can do, but be wise as a serpent and harmless as a dove. All right? I'm not telling nobody to do anything out of out of what I'm considering the norm. And I'm going to use that word real loosely. But you are supposed to be observing the Shabbat. But don't get to the point. And always remember, you were disobedient in your land. And in this land here, what we're supposed to be doing now is rehearsing the righteous acts. I have no issues with that. But just be mindful is that there are going to be certain things that you have to do on the Shabbat to defend and protect your family. And I'll leave that there. Antiochus Epiphanes the madman. All right? He was the madman, because his name was actually changed from Antiochus Epiphanes into Antiochus Epiphanes, which means the madman. So Antiochus Epiphanes reigned from 175 BC until 164 BC. Antiochus Epiphanes was a hostage of Rome to control his father Antiochus III in 188 BC. So, if we were to do some math here, we got to do the math. What we have here, Coty has England and British, so we see where America got her independence from. which is interesting, like you said. So that would actually be happening under the Ka zone, okay, where America fought and got her independence from the British in 1776. So Britain is a young empire. Yes, there is British. The British is a young empire, but Rome comes up after the Greeks, is what I'm trying to establish here. Okay, and so we have now 168 BC, and we have now the British. That whole era happened in the AD era, and I'm still right now in the BC era. So I just want to make sure that I, stay on track here a little bit. All right, but let's do some math here, Mishpachar. Let's do some math here, because the math doesn't lie. Antiochus Epiphanes was a hostage in Rome to control his father, which is Antiochus III, in 188 BC. So we're going to do 188 minus 175. And so we have that Antiochus Epiphanes was actually a hostage in Rome to control his father for about 13 years. 13 years. Because Antiochus Epiphanes reigned from 175 BC to 164 BC, which is roughly 11 years. Okay? 11 years. So let's read on down. Antiochus Epiphanes III died in 187 BC, and he was replaced by his older brother, Seleucus IV. Antiochus Epiphanes ruled Syria and Judea from 175 BC to 164 BC, and that's 11 years. But again, I showed the map on the areas that the small horn was supposed to reign. And so far, Antiochus Epiphanes is not fitting this description, because once again, he inherited his position, or he inherited these countries. So once again, Antiochus Epiphanes IV ruled Syria and Judea from 175 BC to 164 BC. Antiochus Epiphanes desecrated the temple by sacrificing a pig on the altar in 167 BC. Antiochus reigned 3 more years, and he died in 164 BC. The temple was rededicated in 165 BC. And so 2 years later, the temple was rededicated by Judas Maccabeus. So it lay desecrated for 2 years. And then, like I said earlier, Antiochus Epiphanes died the following year. The temple and the altar lay desolate, not destroyed, okay, not destroyed for 2 years. This is a $1 million question, so please pay very close attention. Did Antiochus Epiphanes fulfill the 2,000 evenings and mornings prophecy? Did he fulfill that? And the answer is no. There is a mathematical equation out there where some are, I've read in some books, and some brothers are teaching this, so I'm not making mockery or making fun. I'm only sharing with you my experience in reading and how some are actually trying to break down the 2,300 evenings and mornings. The 2,300 evenings and mornings is not talking about the 2,300 evenings and mornings in regards to the daily sacrifice. That word sacrifice is in italics. It is not there. It's only talking about the continual daily, and we'll talk about that in part 2 of this lesson here. But Antiochus Epiphanes, I'm going to go on the record for saying this, he did not fulfill the 2,300 evenings and mornings. When you begin to look at now, especially when he desecrated the temple. From the time that he desecrated the temple, and by the time that it was rededicated, it was only 2 years. And you cannot get 2,000 evenings and mornings out of 2 years. You just simply can't do it. The math doesn't work. Let me just move on here because I'm going to explain this a lot more in detail in part 2. Now let's take a brief look at the Battle of Pydna that I talked about earlier. Proving now is that this little horn is not Antiochus Epiphanes, but actually the Romans. The Battle of Pydna in June 168 BC was a decisive Roman victory that ended the third, watch this now, that ended the Third Macedonian War and established Rome as the dominant power in the Mediterranean area. Not Antiochus Epiphanes, not the Seleucid dynasty. The Seleucid dynasty was on their way down at this point. Remember, Antiochus Epiphanes ran from 165 BC to 164 BC. Rome was already in operation prior to 188 BC. This is how they were able now to control the Seleucid dynasty. Rome was already at play as a small kingdom becoming a great kingdom. So you had two kingdoms running side by side, the Seleucid dynasty and you had the Roman Empire. And the Roman Empire at this point was stronger than the Seleucid dynasty. That's a fact. So the Roman Republic was expanding, enlarging its sphere of influence along the Adriatic. So when several of the southern Greek city-states appealed to them to ward off the advances of Philip V of Macedonia, they entered into the fray, commencing a series of what became known to history as the Macedonian Wars. How can you escape the Macedonian Wars? Rome is on the scene now. How do you defend, or how was the Greeks now able to defend themselves with the next empire coming up, which were the Romans? Please, you must read the Battle of Pydna, and you must understand the wars of the Macedonian Wars. And on the right here, you have the triumph of Aemilius Paulius. Rome is on the scene now. They are the big boys on the block. All right. I know a lot of Christian writings are still going with Antiochus Epiphanes, but as more information comes to light, I believe that everybody should change their position because of this mere fact there's more information now available for us. All right, so let's continue on. Let's continue on. Let's continue on. Let's see here. Okay, let's keep it moving. They entered into a fray, commencing a series of what became known to history as the Macedonian Wars. In June of 168 BC, the Roman general Lucius Aemilius Paulius entered into battle against Philip's successor and son Perseus near Pydna, a city of northeastern Greece. The resulting fight would spell the end of an empire established by Philip II and his son Alexander the Greek. That is so self-explained. I don't know what else to say behind it. I just really, truly don't. The next world power. History reveals that the next kingdom mentioned in Daniel chapters 2 and 7, that one that would follow Greece is Rome. This is in harmony with the prophetic rule of repeat and expand, where the same prophecy is foretold more than once, and each time more detail unfolds. Daniel, the 7th chapter, verses 24 to 27, establishes that Rome in its papal form will be succeeded by the kingdom of the Mashiach. The little horn of Daniel 8 fits this pattern exactly. It follows Greece, and it is finally supernaturally destroyed, broken without human means. This is Daniel 8:25. As Jesus or the Mashiach's second coming, compare Daniel 8:25 with Daniel 2:34. Daniel 8 says that the Medo-Persians will become a great, in verse 4. This is what I was talking about before. Please pay very close attention. Daniel, the 8th chapter, says that the Medo-Persians will become great. The Grecians, very great. The little horn, exceedingly great. This is what it says. Daniel, again, 8 says that the Medo-Persians will become great. That's in verse 4, excuse me. The Grecians would become very great. That's verse 8. The little horn, exceedingly great, in verse 9. Antiochus Epiphanes did not become exceedingly great, period. Simply did not. History is clear that no power following Greece and occupying Israel became exceedingly great other than Rome, which, as the prophecy also predicted, extended its power to the south, Egypt, the east, Macedonia, and the glorious land, Israel. That's a fact. Moreover, only Rome has attempted to stand against the Mashiach, the Prince of the hosts, and the Prince of princes. Verse 25, pagan Rome crucified him and also destroyed the Yahudims. Later, the papacy or papal Rome effectively caused the heavenly sanctuary to be cast down. We're talking about the people. And trampled underfoot, verse 13, by seeking to replace the Mashiach as our high priest in heaven with an earthly priesthood which claims to forgive sins. The church father. When we have the father or the Catholic priest saying now he has the ability to forgive sins. Let's read on. The Mashiach is a heavenly priest in heaven and an earthly priesthood that claims to forgive sins. Of course, obviously, no one but the Father can forgive sins. That's Luke the 5th chapter, verse 21. And the Mashiach is our only mediator. That's 1 Timothy 2 and 5. Daniel 8 tells us that the little horn will also destroy many of the Father's people. That's in verses 10, 24, and 25 in the book of Daniel, the 8th chapter. And cast truth down to the ground, verse 12. When asked how long the Father's prophecy and the sanctuary would be attacked, the angel replied, for 2,300 days, and the sanctuary shall be cleansed. That's Daniel 8 chapter verse 14. Heavenly reply was that the sanctuary in heaven and the Father's church on earth will experience a cleansing after 2,300 prophetic days, which is 2,300 literal years. In Bible prophecy, there is a day for a year principle. See Ezekiel, the 4th chapter, verse 6. I brought this out before. And Numbers, the 14th chapter, verse 34. We learn Mishpachah. The cleansing of the earthly sanctuary took place on the fourth day, on the Day of Atonement, the seventh month, the 10th day. Elohim's people were identified as belonging to him, and the record of their sins was removed. Those who clung on to sin, however, were cut off from Israel. Thus the camp was cleansed, and that's in Daniel the 8th chapter, verse 14. The sovereign assured Daniel that the sin and the little horn would not always prosper, control the world, and persecute the Father's people. Instead, there will be a righteous kingdom reestablished here on the earth again, Mishpachah. That is a guarantee. Guaranteed. And the final slide is this here. The universe will be cleansed from sin forever. Forever, ever, forever, ever. How long is forever? Olam, in this context, forever, ever is forever, ever. All right? There's no other way to break that down. The wrongs against the Father's people will at long last be righted, and the peace that once characterized Eden will once again fill the earth. So what does that mean? Let me just bring out these three scripts here, and we will be done for tonight. And I thank you so very much for your time and your participation. All right. I couldn't do it without you guys here. And this is all about coming to the right understanding of Torah. All right. Let's look at the book of Ezekiel. The book of Ezekiel. Let's look at the 36th chapter. Let me pull it up right quick. The 36th chapter. Let's excuse me. Let's look at excuse me. Let's look at 33. Take a little water here. Excuse me. 36:33. Thus saith the sovereign, Adonai, YAHUAH, in the day that I shall have cleansed you from all your iniquities. This is 36:33. Ezekiel 36:33 to 35 is where I'm going to be reading from. Thus saith the sovereign, in the day that I have cleansed you from all your iniquities, I will also cause you to dwell in the cities, and the waste places, obviously, shall be built. And the desolate land shall be tilled, whereas it lay desolate in the sight of all that passed by. As long as the original inhabitants are not in the land will rest and have her Shabbats. All right? She will rest and have her Shabbats. Verse 35, and they shall say, this land that was desolate is become like the Garden of Eden, and the waste and desolate and ruined cities are become fenced and inhabited. Isn't that beautiful? And they shall say that this land that was desolate is become like the Garden of Eden, and the waste and desolate and ruined cities are become fenced and inhabited. And I like that word fenced. Meaning now is that what we see happening, or what had happened now when Israel came out of the Babylonian captivity, Israel still needed a physical army to defend herself. This next deliverance and what we're talking about here, this fenced location here, okay, will not be protected by earthly or man. This is now going to be the works of the Father himself protecting the nation of Israel. All right? This is going to be the Father now protecting the nation of Israel where we will not need a physical army. It would get to the point where we would not need a physical army to protect ourselves. Let's look at the book of Jeremiah, the 51st chapter. The 51st chapter, verse 3. Let me start at verse 1. Isaiah 51, 1 through 3. Hearken to me, you that follow after righteousness, you that seek the Father, or seek YAHUAH. Look unto the rock whence you are hewn, and to the hole of the pit whence you are digged. Did you catch that? One more time. Hearken to me, you that follow after righteousness, you that seek YAHUAH. Look unto the rock whence you are hewn, and to the hole of the pit, basically, that you have digged. So now that you find yourself in this situation, and if you look to follow after righteousness, you follow after righteousness by putting down the ways of the world, and then you begin to follow the sovereign, the Father. Verse 3. For YAHUAH will or shall comfort Zion. What we see what's happening with Babylon, Israel coming out of Babylon and then going to reestablish themselves. And we talked about the 490 year, that Moray vision. That was only temporary. We're talking about something that is permanent. What Israel would no longer be removed anymore. That has not happened yet. That is now a Chazon prophecy, not a 490-year Moray prophecy. Let's read on. For the sovereign will comfort Zion, he will comfort all her waste places, and will make her wilderness like Eden, and her desert like the garden of YAHUAH. This garden will be a garden of joy, and gladness shall be found therein, thanksgiving and the voice of melody. One more verse. Hearken unto me, my people, and give ear unto me, O my nation. O my nation. For a law shall proceed from me, and I will make my judgment to rest for a light of the people. Hallelujah, hallelujah, hallelujah. The book of Joel. The book of Joel, the second chapter. I'm going to read verses 1 through 3. Joel, the second chapter, verses 1 through 3. Blow you the trumpet in Zion. We didn't say all over the world, Zion. Zion is representing a location, and the location is associated with people. So the land and the people are synonymous. Blow you the trumpet in Zion, and sound an alarm in my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of YAHUAH cometh, for it is near at hand. A day of darkness it will be, and of gloomness, a day of clouds and of thick darkness, as the morning spread upon the mountains. Watch this. A great people and a strong. There hath been ever the like, neither shall be any more after it to the days of many generations. Now watch this. When Israel was under the Babylonian captivity, not all Israel returned and helped in the rebuilding of the city. Some of the people were living a pretty good life. They didn't want anything else to do with rebuilding of the walls and reestablishing Israel as a nation. Not everybody was in agreement with that. Some people continued on in Babylon and became wealthy, made a name for themselves in Babylon. I'm talking about at the time when Daniel's prophecy came to an end. Well, Israel, it's the same thing that's happening here today. Not everybody is willing to put both feet into Torah. Let me say this again. Not everybody is willing to put both feet in Torah. And this is where it becomes complicated for brothers like myself and others, where we want to put both feet in Torah. We do what we have to do while we're here, but no decision made. Nothing overrides Torah. So let's not get it twisted. We go out, we do what we have to do. Any problems or any issues that we might have, Torah settles the matter, not the judicial system of America. We are able to govern and institute our own laws amongst ourselves. We can do that. We don't have to wait for the Father to do that. Only thing that we're asking for are righteous judges. Just like the scripture teaches us in the book of Psalms, know ye not that you are gods? Well, when you look at that word gods, all right, know you not that you are judges? Judges. And you should be able to judge the matter, as long as you're following after righteousness. As it tells us now in the book of Isaiah, the 51st chapter, verses 1 through 3. But let's read on. Verse 3. Watch how verse 3 gets very interesting. It says, a fire devoureth before them, which is the righteous, and behind them a flame burneth. That sounds like Israel when we came out of Egypt. Watch this again. A fire devoureth before them, and behind them a flame burneth. The land is as the Garden of Eden before them. So I'm here to share with everybody here. If we continue on the right path, and if we understand how important it is for us to keep covenant marriage commitments to one another, if we understand that, because it's a reflection on how we're supposed to have our intimate relationships, or relationship, singular, with the Father. There is a prize at the end of the race, which is the Garden of Eden. So the Garden of Eden is before them, and behind them a desolate wilderness. Yea, and nothing shall escape them. 1 second, Ms. McCall. 1 second, we're almost done. Okay, Mr. McCall, in ending, there's a brother by the name of Vincent Hutchison, spelled Vincent Hutchison. He has a very good book out. It's called Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter, and he goes over verses 15 to 68. And it's History Untold to the Masses. It is a very good book. I still have quite a few pages to read. There's been a whole lot that's been going on with me studying also my own personal information. But the brother name, again, is Vincent Hutchison. The name of this book is Deuteronomy, Deuteronomy, the 28th chapter, verses 15 to 68. History Untold to the Masses. And he actually has his phone number on the back of the book. So, being that he have it on the back of the book, I guess it would be okay to bring out his information. No, I'm not going to put out his phone number. I'm not going to do that. Purchase the book, and you'll be able to, I guess, contact him through his phone number. But let me just read some one little passage that he has, or bio that he has on the back of the book. This book is intended to set the suppressed truth to the forefront. The history untold to the masses identifies the fact that the true Israelites went into a spiritual sleep while the world made sure their descendants did not wake up. The author contends that the Israelites are found in archaeology and in the writings of other nations. The author contends that the history of the Israelites did not end in 70 AD, which I'm a strong advocate of. Again, the author, which is Vincent Hutchinson, contends that the history of the Israelites did not end in 70 AD, but that the Israelites migrated, in this case, to the western coast of Africa and were later shipped into the Western Hemisphere and enslaved. The author also uses lingual, historical, both biblical and non-biblical, to arrive to the thesis that the said African American West Indians are part of the scattered tribes of Israel. And once again, it is a very, very good book. I like the read. I'm having no issues with it. I endorse the book 100%. And I'm going to actually give you the brother's Hebrew name. The brother's Hebrew name, because I want to make sure that I pronounce it correctly. The brother's name is Yashra'al, Danite, the historian, Yashra'al. Yashra'al, the Danite historian, Yashra'al, a very good brother. Had a chance to talk to him for a few minutes. I told him as soon as I'm finished with the book, I'll actually give him a call, and we can discuss more in detail about his book. And his book I find very interesting is because it even well, put it this way, his book even now, for me, challenges a new teaching that I'm hearing, is that America is actually the promised land. All right, so I like what he's doing. And so once again, the brother name is Yeshiah, spelled Yeshiah, Danite, Danite, historian, Yisrael. And the name of his book is Deuteronomy, the 20th chapter, verses 15 to 68, History Untold to the Masses. And his name is Vincent Hutchins. All right. So once again, Mr. McCall, I want to thank you for your time here this evening. And it was a pleasure having you attend tonight's service, Mr. McCall. And what I'm going to do is end services. I'm going to end services, and I want to thank you for your time and your participation. Your donations, we'd be glad, we appreciate it. What I do with the donations is I buy things of that sort. So once again, I want to thank you for everything, Mr. McCart. Until the next time, I say shalom, shalom, shalom.